There is a some good producers on it, but then there's also some wines that, even for me working in wine, I don't really know what they are,
Huh.
which is fun. But I also think that for guests looking for a classic bistro experience,
Yeah.
you're leaving money on the table. So Frenchette in New York, or this like corner of Tribeca, Lower Manhattan. It's a French restaurant, as you would guess, in bistro in style. A couple of the original chefs of Balthazar. And so Balthazar is like is a quintessential New York restaurant that's been around forever, serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Very busy restaurant. Again, a brasserie. So this is kind of like, I don't want to say a newer style brasserie, but it probably opened 8 or so years ago. The menu is very traditional French bistro, if you will, lunch and dinner and brunch. But then the wine list that we'll talk about today is very natural wine leaning, to a point that I at least wanted to like kind of talk about it, because I would say that it's pretty polarizing. Their wine person is very natural wine leaning, and there is, the bistro, like if you think of the great bistros in Paris, Paul Bert or L'Ami Louis, there is a tradition of maybe some more forward thinking wines there. The tricky thing that I think about when I think of a bistro is a lot of people already have a preconceived notion of what they are going to order in that restaurant. I'm going to order a steak frites and I want a glass of Bordeaux, or I
Hmm.
want a glass of Beaujolais, right? But the Beaujolais probably needs to be pretty clean and not funky. So, that's kind of my first takeaway with this list is there's there is there's some good producers on it, but then there's also some wines that, even for me working in wine, I don't really know what they are,
Huh.
which is fun, right? But I also think that for guests looking for a classic bistro experience,
Yeah.
you're leaving money on the table. Looking through champagne. So, my kind of first takeaway with the wine list is there's some great producers. Ganevat is one of the benchmark producers of the Jura.
Mm.
This is their sparkling wine. That's cool to see. But then there's a lot of other wines that I don't know what they exactly are.
Hmm.
There's some Slovenia sparkling wines, and then the other wines that I recognize, they're expensive. Vouette Sorbet, the cheapest one is $240. Ulysse Collin, one of the great producers of champagne, or in champagne right now. They have, that's not entry level for $565, right? When you're kind of looking at the bones of the wine list, this is all of the Loire Valley. Again, it's quite the same statement, but you don't have a Sancerre,
Uh-huh.
which is what probably people are looking for, especially like kind of that area. Yes, you are in New York, so people are a little maybe more forward thinking, but you're also in Tribeca. Probably there's people there that want to drink what they want, and you're missing some opportunities just in terms of having some name brand things. Natural wine leaning. You have a ton of wine from the Jura and Alsace. There's a chunk of Burgundy, but again, not wines that I necessarily would recognize. So yeah, it's a funny, interesting little list. Some Italian. So this is mostly this does read like these wines are mostly orange in Italy, Slovenia, Austria, rosé. Oh, so okay, yeah. So and then again, these rosés, the ones that I do recognize, they're a little more oxidative. They're a little more off the beaten path. Where again, people in a brasserie are probably looking for a classic. They're looking for a classic Provence style rosé.
Yeah, and
Um,
these don't look to be cheap either. Like for
no,
for such like obscure wines and things that are,
yeah,
and I know natural wine is generally not as expensive as some of these wines, right?
the harder to find ones can be expensive, but
Yeah.
I question how many people are buying these wines in this environment, right? Or seeking out these wines kind of where they are in Manhattan.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of just like the overview is, hey, this is an interesting wine list because of I'd say just kind of the point of view, right? But for me, it doesn't necessarily make sense in their environment where they are and the food component that they're offering, right? Like, hey, it's a bistro. You should have. Yeah, I would say this is a very good page of wine here because
Beaujolais.
they have a pretty classic, they have a nice Beaujolais page. People want to drink Beaujolais at these kind of restaurants. And like, there are some wines here, they have Foillard, Lapierre, they have Coton, they have wines that I recognize that would go really well with this kind of food.
What I read here is that their somm and the beverage side of the business has
Mm-hmm.
to work extra hard to get people to understand this menu.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
they have to work overtime because people are not finding anything traditional at all. And
Yeah.
but
Or
yeah,
for sure. There's that, or they're just not selling as much wine.
either that or they're not making as much money. Exactly.
Right.
So either way you lose. And it's not that we're not trying to be forward thinking. It's that we're just respecting what people already look for in general
Yeah.
by listing things that are more traditional because a bistro is not a new concept.
Right.
A bistro is an old concept.
Right. But again, it's one of these concepts that if you are serving bistro food, there's an expectation of what people get with that
That's right. Yeah.
experience. And when you don't have those kind of things to give that experience, it's, you're just not going to sell wine.